Hi, good morning. I guess we'll get started. My name is Donna Dingle. I'm from the Office of Disability Services, and I know most of you know me or familiar with most of this presentation. I did change it up some. If at any time you have questions, just kind of shout out because the lights make it hard for me to see. So I want to make sure that I do see you. So why do we accommodate students? We accommodate students because of these laws. Okay, these are different laws than the K-12 community. So a lot of our freshman students come in expecting their IEPs to carry over. IEPs end at graduation. So once they come to college, they get accommodations based on a different law, the ADA, the 504 of the Rehab Act. And the emphasis on accommodations is for equal access, not success. K-12, it's all about success. College, it's about access. Okay, so the Office of Disability Services, right now we have about 400 students. We're in the process of doing intakes with our new freshmen. We meet with the students, we determine their disabilities, the functional limitations of the disabilities, and which accommodations will provide the access that they're going to need so they can be an active participant on the campus. We also have a mentor program. Our mentor works with the students one-on-one each week to work with transition skills, executive functioning skills. We help with that transition from special ed in high school, where maybe they're more sheltered and getting a lot of support, to the independence of college. We work on them with appropriate behavior, how to access the help they're going to need, tutoring, advising, things like that. We have assistive technology trainer who teaches the computer software programs the students use for note-taking, for test-taking, to help them to read easier. There's a lot of really nice apps out there that every year we get more and more. So we're giving students access to this. Some of the programs we have that we download onto their computers, some are free that they just download themselves. We also run the assistive testing room. Our testing room is to help the professors who need to provide students with accommodations. So if a student needs extra time, another half an hour or so, and the professor can't stay for some reason, the students can take the test with us. We also have the technology some students might need that they would not be able to use in the classroom, such as the software that reads things aloud. So our testing room is available 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, to help the faculty accommodate students. We also do some training for the groups on campus that work with students, the mentors, the GEMs, things like that. And we work with a lot of departments. This year we're working a lot with accessibility, especially for students who are blind or visually impaired. So we're trying to work with a lot of faculty on how to create some accessible documents. Any student who wishes to get accommodations at Kean needs to register with our office. They need to provide the documentation that supports their disability. They need to come in for an intake so we can have a conversation. They will then give each teacher a letter stating the accommodations that have been approved. At that point, they can then use our mentor services, they can use our testing room, they can come train on some of our equipment. There's a lot of little services they can get, but they must follow the procedure in order to get accommodations. We don't give accommodations to students who are not registered through the Disabilities Office. Okay, students have a right to equal access to all classroom materials and all buildings and activities on campus. The buildings is really not a problem for the most part. There are a couple that are a little difficult. CAS, for example, is very accessible itself, but for students with severe mobility, they can't park next to it. So occasionally we have to move a classroom from CAS, or another internal building, to a building where parking is right next to it. Students have the right for a reasonable, effective accommodation and information available in the format that they can access. For example, the blind students would either need Braille or the Word document that they can use on their JAWS program, depending on how they read. Students have responsibilities to register with Disability Services, to provide the documentation that we require. They have a responsibility to meet all standards, academic and behavioral. They need to follow our guidelines. There are policies or procedures that they must follow. They can't just walk into a classroom or walk into our office and start demanding things. They need to follow the procedures. And if they don't provide a letter from our office to each teacher, then they don't get accommodations. That's part of what their responsibility is. Okay, so a reminder, reasonable accommodations create an even playing field, okay? They lessen the effect of the disability. They change how a test is given. For example, some students may need an oral test. They may need a scribe, or they may need a computer to type their answers, but the test itself doesn't change. Accommodations do not change an essay test to multiple choice, or an open book test, or a take-home test. Students take the same test. They have to meet the same standards. They just use a different format. Accommodations do not change what a student is expected to learn. They do not change the core elements of a course, provide an undue advantage, and I have never written an accommodation that says students can continually postpone and reschedule tests. I know that some students have been using that, have been doing that, and some professors are going along with it, but I just wanted to make it clear that is not an accommodation. That gives students an unfair advantage. Students occasionally request accommodations that are denied. Okay, if an accommodation will reduce the standards of a course or the university, it can be denied. It can be denied if it alters the fundamental nature of a course. If it's unreasonable or unreasonably expensive, although to prove unreasonably expensive is a very, very high ceiling. If the documentation does not support it. Not every student who has a disability gets every accommodation they want. They don't come in and just check off. It has to be, it's based on their disability. If they have a reading disability and you can see their scores for decoding are really low, then maybe they need an oral book. They need the read aloud software. So it's based individually, one-on-one, through conversation and review of the documentation. And we don't give accommodations that would provide unfair advantage. Okay. So a lot of students now are asking for absences, excused absences, and a lot of excused absences. We also have a lot of students recently who want extensions on assignments. And a lot of students are coming with the request of extensions on every assignment, all assignments. In some classes, that may be fine, either the absences or the extensions, but in others, it may change the way your course is taught. It may alter the fundamental requirements. So this is the policy that the court has basically decided colleges should go through to determine this. Okay, so the syllabus should have the requirements of the course on it. And then once a student requests an accommodation, for this case I'll say absences, the professor and the department, it really shouldn't be one person, it should be a couple professors, maybe the deans or the executive director, somebody else, looks at the requirement of the course to decide what exactly is being required. Sometimes people give oral presentations in their class, and then you need to determine, is the oral presentation to the group the actual assignment? Is that what we're looking for? Or is it just the students to create an assignment? Then, and this really is more for like the technical schools, grad school, med schools and stuff, you should check with other schools to see how are they accommodating this request. And will it invalidate the objective of your course, of your requirement? If the answer is yes, then you can start searching for alternatives. Okay, so for a presentation, sometimes you have to get up and speak, and most of our students would prefer to be excused from oral presentations. Sometimes, depending on what you're really looking for, sometimes a student can videotape themselves giving the speech. Other times a student might give it one-on-one with the professor. It really, we have to look at this individually. It really does make a difference in your course. So these are the questions that your group should consider. Is there an alternate way for the student to acquire or demonstrate the skill? Have we searched for alternatives? Have we included the necessary people in the search? So that sometimes it may not be just a professor. If it's a medical concern, maybe it's somebody from health services, or maybe it's someone from our office. Have you identified whether other institutions have found alternatives that might work for your class? If you've gone through this policy, if you've gone through these questions, then you can deny the accommodation if it will alter your course, the fundamental requirements, okay? Basically, this is what the courts have kind of boiled everything down to. A student comes with a request, we can't just say no, okay? Every request has to be listened to, documentation has to be looked at, we have to have kind of an interactive process, and then we can respond. The answer may be no, but we can't just say no right off the top. We have to go through the steps first. Okay, flexibility in attendance is interesting. When I write the accommodation, some students have severe medical conditions that may flare. And when there's flaring, they're not going to be able to make it to class. So I usually ask for flexibility in the attendance policy, and then I put in parentheses to be determined in discussion with student, professor, and ODS, that's us. I've yet to have anyone call to have a conversation around this. So I'm not saying to a professor, you must allow the student an unlimited amount of absences, because that's ridiculous. But the amount of absences that would be reasonable is determined by how your course is run. So some of the questions to think about. Is there classroom interaction between the instructor and the students, or among the students themselves? Do student contributions constitute a significant component of the learning process? Is it a group-based learning class? Is it a project-based learning class? When the students are not listening to lectures, when they are doing the learning in small groups, if one is absent, it affects the other students. And that effect on the other students constitutes an alteration to the requirement. So it may be that in your class, maybe your flexibility may be 2 absences because it's affecting the other students. You also, if it's meeting once a week or 3 times a week, we have to think about. Again, we're going to look at your syllabus. What does your syllabus say about these requirements? How are you grading? Is there a policy? Do you have an attendance policy? So when you get an accommodation for attendance, don't just assume the student is just going to constantly be absent and that's fine, because that's not it. We need to kind of work through this, and we're getting more and more of these requests. The students themselves feel that, well, I'm sick, so of course you're going to excuse me. And then comes the other problem, all the work they have to make up. Will you accept all this work late? So you need to start looking at how your course is developed. Maybe in departments you can start having conversations about which of these fundamental requirements really need to be met as written. Which can we change and adapt a little bit? It may be a student can only miss 1 or 2. It may be a student can miss 6 or 7. Remember though, even though they're absent, it doesn't mean they have to pass. Not penalizing an absence does not mean you automatically pass a student. They are still responsible for the learning. And let's be honest, if you miss 7 classes, it's going to affect your learning. It's going to affect your grades. Okay, so don't feel that if a student has excused absences, it's also an automatic A, because it doesn't work that way. They still have to meet the same standards, but we need to work it out. So I would be very happy to have a conversation should this come up in a class, so we can kind of figure out where we stand. Also, you may consider, part of our discussion in advance would be, you know what, I can probably go with 3 or 4 absences, but if you pass that, it's going to be really, now we're going to have to start having a conversation. So if a student gets to 3 or 4, then we're going to have to bring the student back in and say, okay, look, at this point, can you meet the goals of this course? It may be the student needs to medically withdraw, or a retroactive or a late withdrawal or something like that. So we do have to have ongoing conversations when it comes to this. I don't want teachers to feel bullied that the students are just, allowed to miss. I had one student who missed 20 classes in a semester, and then caused a major scene because the teacher was taking points off grades. It was affecting her grades. That's not what accommodations are supposed to do. Professor has the right to maintain the academic and behavioral standards of your course. The behavioral issue, we'll get to that in a minute. Receive verification of accommodations. My letters has the Kean seal up top, has my signature on the bottom. has the student's name, their ID number, and the approved accommodations. Please don't accept accommodations that look different than that, or that have someone else's signature, because I'm the only one who signs them. My name is the only one that's going to be on them. It's also going to have your semester. Every semester it says fall, you know, the next one, the ones we're working on now say fall 2018, and they have the new Kean seal. Don't accept old letters. Some of our students are recycling letters, and what you don't know is some of the students had temporary accommodations, but we don't write temporary on top because the students deserve some kind of privacy. So they keep their old ones, and they're getting accommodations they no longer need. So it's important that you check the date to make sure it's ours. If you have any questions, call me. You know, we print them out and hand them to the students. Sometimes we will email it to the student. I prefer to hand them a paper copy. But if it's an online class or the students are evening students and can't get here during the day, sometimes we will email them as PDFs, but as we all know, sometimes PDFs can be changed into Word documents and altered. So if there's any questions, please call. The professor has the right to expect students to complete all the course requirements, and that students will communicate requests for accommodations in a timely fashion. We're having a couple of issues this summer with visiting students. They feel that their accommodations and their procedures from their home school should carry over here, and it doesn't. A student should not walk into your classroom on the day of a test and say, oh, by the way, I need to take it over with disability services. They need to give you advance notice. We tell them a week, but it really needs to be at least 3 days notice that they give you our yellow sheet, which I have. You can't miss it, nice and yellow. So you can send us the exam. Then the students need to make the appointments. I know some students, their disability is going to cause them to be forgetful or to be disorganized. So, you know, if you get it the day before and you can email me the exam, that's fine. But just so you understand, you do have the right. These students should be asking you for things in a timely manner. Okay. Confidentiality goes both ways. So you're going to get a letter from me. It's not going to say what the disability is, only what the approved accommodations are. The professors do not have a right to know the disability. Now, as you know, most of our students will freely share, but you're not usually getting the information from me unless they give me permission to share that with you. Excuse me. When you get the letter, I'm going to ask that you keep it somewhere safe. Don't leave it laying around for other students to read, because we do want to protect the identity of the students who are registered with our office. If you're going to be discussing their accommodations, please don't do it in front of the class. Do it after class, in your office. You know, you can always say to the student, come to my office hour and let's discuss it. You know, try to be aware of who's around when you're having conversations, and if you are having a conversation with your peers, be aware of using names, because you never know who's around that's listening. Please give them the accommodations on the letter. Do not over-accommodate. The students are getting very demanding, actually. They're going to come in and they're going to tell you, well, you know, she didn't put this down, but I get open notes. I get to use a note card. I get to use my book during tests. If I didn't put it down, it's because it's not approved. So you don't have to, please don't give them accommodations not written. If they ask for accommodation that's not on the letter, send them back to me. We can always review the documentation. Any kinds of problems you have, any questions you have, please call. The professors who call me at the beginning when they have a question, it ends up, we can kind of figure things out early instead of having them build to the end. And the last responsibility of professors is something that a lot of people don't want to do. But if you have a behavioral issue in your class, please fill out a report. If you're really concerned about the student's behavior, change in behavior, do a CUBIT, the Behavioral Intervention Team report. If it's a code of conduct violation, please put it in writing. I get a lot of phone calls from professors telling me student A is doing this and that. I can call the kid in and the student's going to say to me, oh, class is great, I'm so good, I'm fine. Put it in writing so it can go through the channels. Also, if a student is caught cheating in our testing room, which unfortunately did happen this semester, we are going to report it right away to the professor, who is then supposed to write the, is it academic?
Academic integrity
Academic integrity report. We don't write the report because I'm not faculty. Okay, that needs to come from you, but we are giving you this, we are telling you the student cheated, we are giving you whatever proof we have of it, and then we need you to write these reports, because what's happening is I'm hearing about it, but there's no written trail. And students are doing this multiple times, and it's escalating, but there's nothing that we can do about it as a university because there's nothing written. So please file these reports. Did you want to add anything?
No, I think that's pretty clear. The one piece that I wanted to also reiterate was, it is very important to document any issues you're having in your class. Because what you don't know is that that student may be having an issue in another class. And if you and the other instructor are not reporting it, it continues. And we often get calls, either Donna or myself, at the end of the semester saying, this student has been doing this all semester and I've had enough, I want them out of my class. It's a very difficult situation. So addressing something early puts you in a better situation to help the student handle the classroom environment better, handle your classroom discussions better, and participate more effectively in your class without dominating, if that's the issue.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. In addition, if you're not familiar with Cubit or the Code of Conduct, we are having 2 sessions on Wednesday, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, that talks about those particular units that we have on campus that can assist you with reporting any concerns you have in your classrooms. I hope everyone heard.
Did everyone hear that? The Cubit and Behavioral Intervention and Code of Conduct teams will be having them Wednesday morning and Wednesday afternoon. So you can get more information about them. Thank you. Okay, the accommodations are legal documents. So once you get them, you really can't change them. You can't make changes. If you have a concern or you feel that one of the approved accommodations is going to alter your course, then you get in touch with me. But please don't take it upon yourself to cross things out, make changes on them, and keep them safe. Common test accommodations, extra time. Almost all students have extra time, but not all of them do. And if you notice on the thing, it'll say extra time, and then it will either say time and a half or double time. Occasionally, 75% or 3/4, but for the most part, half time is the average that we get. Distraction limited environment is a separate room. I shouldn't say that, a different room. So students who use our testing room, we sit about 5, or I think we sit 6 during peak time, during finals, with a proctor. We don't ever put somebody alone in a room because your test integrity is important to us. Text reading software is a computer program that takes a picture of the test and reads it aloud to the student. They can control the speed, they can go back. Instead of using a human reader who oftentimes gives them hints, you know, there's some inflection when you're reading the answers, things like that. They use their computer. It also creates for them a sense of independence because they can use this software at home, on books, on articles, things like that. Some students need a computer. So computer for written tasks means they'll probably be typing their notes on a laptop. And when there's essay questions, things like that, they need to type, not handwrite. Some students may need a scribe, which would mean even multiple choice tests, somebody would have to mark the answers for them. Spell checker, calculator. If you're testing spelling of a term, then the spell checker would not be used. But it needs to be part of the requirement of the course. So sometimes medical technology kind of classes, anatomy classes, things like that, spelling is required because it's important to get the right word, the right medicine, things like that. Some of the not so common accommodations. We talked about this before, flexibility in attendance policy. Again, not a free-for-all, just they're probably going to need a few extra more than what your policy calls for. So if your policy allows for 3, they may need 4 or 5. And this is only when the disability is causing the absence. This does not count if they have the flu, if they get a flat tire, things like that. We're only talking about disability-related absences. Flexibility in assignment due dates, same thing. Some students are going to request extra time. There are some students whose, when they flare, not only are they going to miss class, but they can't work. Okay, they're back in the hospital. They're in too much pain. They're just not functioning. So they're going to ask for flexibility. So it may be that if a paper is due on a Friday, you give them till Monday. You know, some professors, and it depends on what the purpose of the course or the paper. Some people are okay with an extra week. Everything is independent, but we need to discuss this in advance. Now, some of these students, you won't get much advance notice on them. If they flare, they're going to let you know. What I tell them is they need to email the professors and copy me as soon as they're able to, so you know. Also, please don't ask for doctor's notes or things like that when students have this accommodation, the flexibility in attendance. I have the documentation in my office. A lot of them do not want you to know what their illness is or what their medical condition is. So they will let me, I have the documentations. If they're hospitalized, I get the paperwork from the hospital. You can call me or email me and I will confirm to you that it was a disability-related absence, but please don't ask for the medical documentation. Plus, we really don't want medical and psychiatric documentation floating all over the campus either. Alternative to class presentations is the oral presentations. I think I've written it twice since I've been here. Occasionally, we have a student who's, you know, maybe we had one who has a severe stutterer and really was humiliated when he tried to do presentations, so he wasn't going to do any. And what I did was I put this as the accommodation when not a fundamental alteration to the course and determined in advance through our discussion. So if a teacher, some teachers are okay with him videotaping it, or some people are allowing, you know, different kinds of, if it's a PowerPoint presentation, they let him record the voice in advance, kind of things like that. We can usually figure something out. It's not a blanket, the student never gives oral presentations, because really to graduate, you're going to have to give a presentation at some point. And it's better if we don't wait till they're in senior seminar about to graduate, and then have to give a presentation or not graduate. We want to make sure that we work with them. Our office works with some of these students. I know there is a speech clinic or lab on campus that they can go to help with their public speaking through the communication department. But in our office, what we've done with some of our students is we'll have them come to us and do their speech with one of us. Maybe it's the mentor, whoever they're more comfortable with. And then we'll bring in maybe a student worker or two and have them do the speech with 2 or 3 of us. And then maybe the whole staff, they'll do it. But we kind of do this scaffolding, and then they go to class. This worked really well. We did this with a student with a traumatic brain injury. He was really concerned. You know, he had a little bit of a speech impediment, and his memory was really terrible. But by doing it with one, there's less anxiety. The second time through, a few more people. And it really does work. We're willing to work with students to get them to the point. It's not doesn't matter what they tell you. I'm telling you, alternative, when possible, does not mean they never have to give a speech. Go ahead.
Just could you please clarify what you were saying before about doctor's notes? My students typically will give me doctor's notes all the time for the flu or anything like that. So did you just, mean pertaining to this?
I meant pertaining
across the board?
No, what I meant was the students who have the accommodation of absences, not to ask them. Some other accommodations that you may not think about is sometimes we have to move a class, as we said, due to various reasons. Some students, we put tables in a classroom, and I understand they have really nice big signs that basically say, don't move them, or they're going to come get you. They disappear a lot the first couple of weeks. We have to, every time the table disappears, it means the student who needs it, the student in the wheelchair or the scooter, or person who needs a chair instead of a desk, can't sit. They don't have a place to work. So we have to hunt them down constantly. So if you have one, please leave it there. Even if the student isn't in your class, that means they use that room at some point during the week. Our students are given early registration, which is a courtesy, not an accommodation, but it's really useful to us because we can get the accommodations in advance, but it's also useful to students whose medication works best at certain times of the day, whose illness may mean that getting up and moving in the morning is very hard for them. They can take later classes. So we kind of, and also they need space between each class. In order to take an exam with extra time, you have to have time in your schedule for that extra half an hour. So we allow them to early register to kind of help with all of that. Sometimes we need to install special software. So if you run a computer lab course, occasionally we have to put enlarged screen enlargers on for our visually impaired students. If it's a blind student, we might actually have to put in JAWS or some other kind of screen reader for them. Occasionally that'll happen, and this little computer thing on the bottom is our eBot. The eBot is an enlarger for students who are visually impaired. This one particularly we bought for math classes. So the student will sit at a table looking at their iPad, and they can enlarge it. Whatever the teacher writes on the board will be on their iPad, and they will enlarge it so they're able to see what's on the thing. If this is the case and the student needs this equipment, one of our staff will show up right before class, set it up, and then come at the end of class and pick it up. Professors don't have to do anything. All faculty are responsible for providing accessible materials for all students. So if you have a deaf student in your course and you use a lot of videos, the videos need to be captioned. Lynda.com, which I think most people are familiar with now, has a lot of videos that are captioned, and YouTube is really captioning more and more of them also. But you want to make sure you preview your videos to make sure they're captioned. If they're not captioned and you can find an alternative video that basically serves the same purpose, that's the easiest way. If you have a video you absolutely need, it can be captioned. It has to get sent out to a company that has to, I don't even know how much it costs because honestly we haven't done it yet. But it will take time, so it needs to be done in advance. I usually send emails to professors of students who are blind or deaf in advance to give you the notice. For students who are blind or visually impaired, you may be asked to email them PowerPoints or handouts before class. The reason I'm asking you for that is they need time to download them to their tablet or their laptops so they can use their software to access them, to read them. It may be that they need to enlarge them, and it may be they need to listen to it through JAWS. Sending it like right before class usually isn't giving them enough time, and with some of the blind students, sometimes we have to convert the JAWS. Convert the PowerPoint to something accessible to JAWS. So we need some time to do it. So really, if you can do this at least a day in advance, the students then will have the same access as those who sit in class and see the PowerPoints. It's not so they have an advantage, it's really so we're at the same point. Students who use JAWS, that's the program that reads for our blind students, need Word documents. When you use a lot of pictures in class, a lot of videos in class with the blind students, be aware about what you're doing. We had one student who was taking a course and all the PowerPoints were just pictures, not words, just pictures. And I'm sure the teacher, what happened was she was describing what was on the thing, but it wasn't useful to the students. So just be aware of what you're doing. If you do pictures, you need to have some kind of a descriptor for them so they know what they're looking at. And this is just a personal pet peeve, but please don't ask the blind students to sign an attendance sheet. They don't see it. Most of them don't write their name. When I ask them to write, they kind of try to scribble their name, but they don't see it, okay? So if that's how you take attendance in class, then you're just going to have to remember they were here, but also handing them papers. I know we're just automatically doing it, but what happens is students come to my office and they go in their bag and they pull out a bunch of papers and say, what is this? Is this important? They don't need the papers because that information should have been emailed in advance to them. When you work in groups and they're doing projects together and they email things back and forth, the group mates also have to send things in an accessible manner, which is something that I didn't think about until it actually came up. So if you do a lot of group work and they're sending, they're building PowerPoints or sending things back and forth, emails are fine. They read emails on their phone. It reads them right out loud to them. But we want to keep that in mind too. This is what an inaccessible PDF looks like. if you're posting anything with 2 columns, anything that black, that sloppy kind of thing, anything with writing on it, crossing out, marks of any type, it will not be read by the program. It needs to be a clean PDF. And you might say, oh, I don't know how to do that. It's okay, because this afternoon at 1:30, we're going to have a workshop that shows you how to create materials accessible to our blind and visually impaired students. It's going to be right here at 1:30, and it's going to be very low key. We're actually going to have the programs for you. We're going to show you how you can do it, and it's going to be a little bit easier than probably you've thought. Last year we had our Don't Break the Dog campaign, and it was a great success in the spring. There were very few incidents of anyone bothering the service dogs on campus. But as a reminder, service dogs are allowed anywhere the student goes. If you teach like a chemistry course or something like that and you have a service dog, we will have to have a conversation, because some areas may not be safe for the dog. So we're going to have to figure out, some students put their dogs in like raincoats and booties, and sometimes we just find an alternative accommodation for the student. If you have a dog in your course, I send you an email in advance, because I don't want you to walk into class and see the big Rottweiler sitting there. Although she's sweet as anything, it would shake up a lot of people, I think. If you have a problem with dogs, if you are allergic, if you are afraid, if you really can't be in close quarters with them, the time to tell somebody is when you get that notice. Because once class starts and the service dog shows up, the service dog has more rights than the rest of us. So if it's between a faculty member and a service dog, the service dog stays. Okay, so advance notice is important. Yes?
For music class.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Affect the hearing for the dogs?
Who's talking now? Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can I get her a microphone?
Yeah, go ahead. What?
For music class.
Yes.
Does that affect the hearing, the dogs?
It shouldn't. I'm sorry.
My question was, what if another student in the class is allergic to that?
Okay, if a student is allergic to a dog, number one, they're not registered with if it's not a disability, it's an allergy, what we do is we start by putting them on different sides. They're not going to know till the first day, because we are not going to warn the class. But they can, and I actually had one girl call hysterical, said, there's this big dog in my class and I'm not going in. So we moved her to a different section. And it is going to happen more and more, but because of the confidentiality, we're not informing the whole class. So first day, you can ask them to move away from the dog, and if it's a severe thing, then they can leave. A lot of times for the 45 minutes, they're okay. Yes, sir?
How about the students who are not, who don't have any disabilities that exist in the class itself? What if they're allergic?
Well, that's what she was saying. So if a student is allergic to a service dog, they can move to the other side of the room. Sometimes that's enough. The service dogs themselves basically just kind of crawl in their little corner. Well, they're big, but they crawl in under the desk, next to the desk. They really don't move around, and they really shouldn't be petted. So there shouldn't be a lot of fur and dander and everything floating around. We did not have issues. I really expected issues with the Rottweiler this semester, and because she just, she showed up in January, and we didn't, I know I announced it to faculty, but we really didn't, people didn't know. And I heard nothing but good things about that nice, big, scary-looking dog. But please, if you see somebody bothering the dogs, leave them, ask them to stop. The blind student, the seeing eye dog especially, the student isn't aware anyone's touching his dog until he tries to walk and the dog doesn't walk. He doesn't see people coming. So you can just, if you can just kind of remind people, leave the dogs alone. The student leaders on the campus, because I've met with most of those groups, have done a great job of passing the word around to other students. So last semester was a much easier semester for the dogs. Our testing room is, we have 2 now. We have one located in the library and one in Downs Hall. The students prefer the library. It's a lot quieter, they say. As I said earlier, we only sit about 5 or 6 students at max, always a proctor, so they're never alone. We have a lot of our technology in it. Students need to make appointments with us. We can't always handle walk-ins. For example, somebody walked in just as we were leaving for this. Never made an appointment. I need to be here. I can't proctor an exam. So they need to make their appointments. Our faculty, our staff who proctor exams, our proctors are part-time. So when we look at the calendar and we say, oh, look, we have, 3 morning exams tomorrow, our part-time person will come and work in the morning. We need to know in advance. So please, a lot of professors will email us the test and think they're making the appointments for the students. Faculty can't make appointments for students. Students need to make appointments for themselves. And that's the Sheila sheet. Students in Kean Ocean register with our office. Theirs is a little different. They can drop their documentation off at the front desk downstairs in Gateway, who will then send me the paperwork, or they can email it to me themselves or call me. We usually will arrange for a day or two, usually 2 days in the summer, for me to go to Ocean and meet with the incoming students to do intakes. And other times, if we can't find a date, we will do it over the phone. The process is the same. They have the same paperwork. The only thing that's different is they may have a phone intake versus an in-person intake until I can get down there. The accommodation letters are exactly the same. The accommodations are the same except for testing. They must test at the Ocean County testing room, which is in their library, and their policy is very different. So if you teach on both campuses, I'm sorry, it's 2 different things. In our office, we prefer you to email me the test because it's easier than walking across campus and I instantly have it. At Ocean, they don't allow you to email the test because they don't have the area to print them all out and things like that. So you need to hand deliver a proctor a paper, and you need to hand deliver the test, or mail it, I guess. And students then, when they make their appointment, just need to identify as Kean students. Okay, so it is a little different. If you are teaching at Ocean and you do have a student with a disability registered with our office, I usually try to send you an email with the information on using their testing center. Now, you can always accommodate your students. Students, some of them just need extra time, and I think probably 80% of faculty accommodate that, can give the students that extra 20, 30 minutes that they need. But if you need to use the testing center down there, I will send you their rules, and you can always call if there's a question. Okay, I use this term a lot, but we ask that you not over-accommodate our students. Over-accommodating is giving accommodations that have not been approved. It's giving accommodations to students who are not registered. A lot of students, it's really funny because in the past, when I first started in this business, people didn't want to be identified as disabled, and now we have almost everybody wanting to be identified as disabled. Students can't just go to you and say, I have a disability and therefore I need extra time on my tests, or I need you to let me use a note card, or I need this or that. That's not how it works. If they do, send them to my office. We will have a conversation. I will ask for the documentation. A lot of professors are very kind and want to help students out. The problem is we really need to treat all of our students the same way. In order for us to be protected, we need to have a policy that we follow, and that means everybody on the campus needs to follow it. So as long as everyone on the campus only accommodates what's on the forms, nobody's doing anything wrong. You will never get in trouble for denying an accommodation that's not approved. And if you have a question or you're concerned, call me, because I have no problems talking to you about the difference between what's approved and not approved. And sometimes I think faculty just want this, like a little extra knowledge that yes, they were right in their decision-making, and I will certainly, walk you through those steps too. I feel like I'm kicking a dead horse with this over accommodating. You all get it, right? Just don't do it, because it does lead to problems. Students who are over accommodated multiple times and then meet a professor who's following the policy, starts filing complaints and starts causing problems and claiming he's being discriminated against by the professor who's actually following the rules. So we want to just all follow the same rules and eliminate some of that. Remember, high school, K-12, those students get success. Oh, the newest requests of accommodations, by the way, are the do-overs. I didn't do well on this test, so can I do it again? Because in high school, I got to take it again. If I got below a 72, and these are how IEPs are written now, below a 72 or a 75 or whatever, the student can retest. That's not an appropriate college accommodation, but you may be students may ask you that. If you allow that for one student, you need to allow it for every student. Now, if in your course you give whatever let's say a student wants to turn their papers in late. If you allow all students to turn things in late, that's fine. But if you're making a decision based on a student's claim of a disability, please don't unless they have the letters. Okay, some of the issues that have come up this past semester. Some students may not be prepared to take an exam. So on the day of a test, they just don't show up, or they call a teacher, or they call us and they reschedule it. We will not reschedule a test unless professors give us permission. So if you say the last day to test is the 12th, and the student on the 12th says, I'm going to come in tomorrow, I'm sick, we will say, only if your professor agrees. And then we will send you an email, your student did not show up. What was happening was some students were getting smart and telling the teachers, oh yeah, I took the test with disabilities. And the teacher says, well, why didn't I get it? Oh, it's in the mail. She put it in campus mail. We don't campus mail exams. We email exams back to professors. This teacher was smart enough to call me, but this was the student. The student never, I don't know what the student was going to do when the mail arrived and nothing was there, but the student bought herself a couple extra days with this. We've had several students who tell professors, oh, they won't let me make that appointment. We always let students make appointments between our hours. We don't always allow walk-ins, but we do allow students to make. So if a student tells you, I said they can't take it on this day, they have to wait till next week, or my favorite, Monday instead of Friday, call me, because chances are I didn't say that. I do not accommodate extra time. Extra time for tests is while they're sitting there, not extra time to study, and especially not extra time so they can talk to everyone who took the test with the class and find out what was on the test. If you have a student with an excused absence, flexibility accommodation, but they're missing a lot of class, please get in touch with me early. I'm not always aware of each time they're absent, but if you get in touch with us earlier, I can reach out to the student and we can then have a conversation, the three of us, at this point, is the student going to pass? Is the student going to be able to meet the requirements? It may be the student needs to drop the course. Or it may be sometimes what happens is students with these excuses are using them kind of like a free card. Like I talked to one student, I said, why did you miss class? Oh, I had to work. That's not excuse. Oh yes, I have excused absences. So if a student's excessively absent, we're going to follow up to make sure that they're all disability related, so please call me. Any questions, anytime, please call me. Okay, a couple important reminders. If you are not happy with one of the accommodations, if you're not sure how you can provide the accommodation, if you feel it's going to alter your course in some way, get in touch with me, please. Don't tell the student, no, I'm not giving this to you, because the student has a contract in their hand. But contact me and we will have a discussion. We can go through some of the questions that we discussed earlier to see is it a fundamental alteration or not. But please don't just randomly decide you're not getting that accommodation. That's where we get into trouble. Students who request other accommodations, if they say things like, oh, I'm supposed to get this, but she forgot to put it on the letter, chances are you should call me. If you're struggling to make accessible materials, give us a call. We'll walk you through. We're having a new student enroll. She is not yet scheduled, but she will be our 5th blind student. Okay, but the other 4, I've reached out to all of their professors already. So they know that their materials need to be accessible to the blind students so they can have access to everything. And just as a warning for all of you science people, I don't know who teaches anatomy, but next fall, a blind student will be taking anatomy. So I'll be reaching out to that department once things kind of settle down this semester, so we can start looking for it in advance. Dr. Tony had a really good idea that he had mentioned to some of the deans. Everybody's professional, each department has a professional organization, and if you reach out to your professional organization, they probably have had blind students or blind professors in this major. and we can get ideas from there. One of our students was an education major, so we did reach out to the education, their federal group, and got a couple ideas on how a blind person can be a teacher. So keep that in mind if that comes up too. Remember, students have to make testing appointments. If you want to allow the students to make up a test, just send me an email, that's fine. If the student is playing a game, we had one student who took all the tests for the semester, 2 weeks ago? The semester ended, 3 weeks ago? Just kept putting them off and putting them off and putting them off and putting them off and putting them off. These students are not meeting the standards of the course if they can't take a test during the actual semester. And nobody should be taking a midterm during finals week. These students are not meeting the same standards as everyone else. So you do not have to allow them. It does, and I know because most of them are so sweet, and it's always the sweet ones you don't want to say no to. But we need to kind of keep some kind of standards for all students. Disability never excuses behavior. I know Nicole in student conduct has picked up on that a lot. Sometimes disability may cause some behavior that is not appropriate, but students need to make the same standards. So if you have a student who is, one of our examples is what I call the oversharer, the student who is constantly has to answer every question or who has to ask 10, 20 questions. Basically the person who's monopolizing the whole class time. That person is affecting the classmates. If you let me know early, I can bring the student in, we can start talking about some methods to cut this down. I tell our students 3 questions. They can ask 3 questions or answer 3 questions. And afterwards, they either go to tutoring or go to a professor's office hours. But what's happening is they're getting away with it at the beginning, and it gets worse and it gets worse, and it escalates till the end of the semester where other students are so frustrated that they're now angry and causing behavioral issues. We want to stop the behavioral issues early, and you need to document them. Okay, occasionally there are students who are not really college appropriate students, and there is no law that says we need to have students in our classroom who are totally disruptive. We have a code of conduct that says they cannot disrupt the education of the others. So we can take care of them whether they're disabled or not. The difference is in K-12, they have a different law where you have to take into consideration what their disability is and how it affects them. So they may have been getting away with this behavior through K-12. When they get to college, and I tell them when I first meet them, this is the behavior that's expected. So please don't feel that you have to accept inappropriate behavior. Any questions? I do have some of our office brochures. I put them up here. If you want to take a couple that way, if you need to refer someone to our office, you can just hand them this information and they'll know how to get in touch with us and what we're looking for. If not, no other questions, and thank you so very much. Did you have something?
Hi, everyone. I want to thank everyone for coming today, and I definitely want to